Okay, good afternoon, Alysha.
Good afternoon.
You okay?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Firstly, thank you very much for inviting me to come and see your Year 11s and to have a look at your use of questioning. I really enjoyed being there. I particularly like the way you varied your questioning from some straightforward definitions building up to very open evaluative questions. You didn't accept simple answers. You used further questioning for clarification, and I thought that was excellent.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just wondered. I've got one question for you about the questioning, which was, what did you think was happening with all of the students in the class every time you asked the question? I was in there for 10 minutes. When you asked the question, what do you think was going on?
Well, I had the questions on the board, but when I was asking them individually, it was in no particular order, and I would hope that they were all thinking about the questions and considering their answers before I picked them to answer the question.
Okay, and I like the fact that you didn't always rely on hands up. Sometimes you did go with the students who had their hands up. Sometimes you asked students who were sat quietly. So there was a bit of variation there, which I like. But how do you know that they were really thinking about the question deeply?
I suppose that's a good point, because in reality, I can't be 100% sure that everybody is necessarily thinking about the question at hand. They could be thinking about one of the other ones that was maybe on offer on the board. So yeah, I suppose that's a good point.
So what do you think you could tweak to with your questioning to ensure that all of the students are thinking about that specific question at that moment?
I suppose maybe I could give them maybe time to think about the question beforehand. So rather than just rattling off the questions and saying, right, Mario, what do you think? Or Anna, what do you think? Give them time to actually consider their response before asking them.
And what would that look like?
So, for example, perhaps if I ask the question, give me one term of the Treaty of Versailles, and I could say, okay, you've got maybe 30 seconds to think about that, and then I could then perhaps pick a pupil to answer that question.
Okay, and then how would you ensure that they've all thought about it though? Because you're asking one student again.
Okay, so perhaps getting them to think and maybe write down their response. So again, for example, I could say, here's a question, give me one term of the Treaty of Versailles, think about it and individually write down your answer, and then perhaps get the answers from them once they've all written it down, because then I know that they have all hopefully answered the question that I've just posed to them.
Excellent. Is there anything else they could do? I think that's great. I think it's brilliant to get them to write it down, because you can see, you can circulate, you can watch what they're doing. Is there anything else you could do once they've written it down before starting on the questioning phase?
Maybe then they could be sharing the responses that they've written down. So, for example, giving them the question, giving them 30 seconds to a minute to write down a response, and then perhaps saying, okay, turn to the partner next to you and exchange your answers. And then I could kind of consolidate by asking somebody the answer to the question.
Definitely. What does discussion look like in your classroom at the moment?
At the moment, it is, so for example, it depends on the question really. If it is a question which is a discussion question, for example, explain or evaluate, or those higher order questioning skills, then I would give them time to think in a think, pair, share type of technique. But it is something that I think I could be doing more of and more effectively. For example, I would only probably use that at the minute later on in the lesson, rather than when I'm doing perhaps checking for understanding at the more beginning parts of the lesson.
Okay, excellent. What if you did, so we're talking about think, pair, share, and getting students to write down the answer. What do you think, if you encourage this in your classroom, what would you hope to see?
In terms of, well, I'd hope to see it more regularly embedded within the lesson, and perhaps, for example, if I'm giving them a question, they are all participating in the thinking stage in particular, because I find that sometimes can be a little bit challenging, maybe. If, for example, I say, okay, here's a question, think about it for 30 seconds, you know, it's sometimes a bit awkward, that period of time, and you don't actually know if they are doing what they are supposed to be doing. So
and it always feels longer than it really is.
Exactly, yeah. So I think the writing it down tip was quite handy. Actually.
Definitely. Well, should we have a look? You've talked about think, pair, share. So let's have a look at the Walkthrus think, pair, share model. I'll put it on. So if you can have the book one, and we can look through this together.
Yeah.
Let's look through the different steps. So, as with all of the walkthroughs, there's five straightforward steps. So the first one is to establish talk partners for every student. So the discussions that you talked about, you want there to be discussions, have got to be planned. You've got to formalize the routines and ensure there are clear, secure guidelines. We'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. So ideally in pairs, and so they've got a very clear idea. We're going to do questioning now, and we're doing think, pair, share. They know exactly what to do.
Yes.
That's all very clear. The second step, set the question with a goal and a time frame. So you've already mentioned 30 seconds, for example, which is fantastic. So what would be a good I'm not a historian, so what would be a good historical question you could ask that would lead to sort of high level thinking and discussion?
Okay. So perhaps something like maybe what was the most damaging term of the Treaty of Versailles for Germany? Because there's quite a few terms, and they have to think about that one a bit to find out which one they believe was the most damaging and humiliating for Germany.
So most damaging term. Okay.
Yeah.
And we were building the thinking time. You've already mentioned that. So do you think 30 seconds is enough?
I would say perhaps a bit more, 30 seconds to a minute. A minute probably is better for that, because I imagine if they're going to be writing down as well, then 30 seconds isn't really enough.
And what I agree. And what would you be doing while they're doing this stage?
Hopefully at this point, because they're all engaged in independent thinking and writing, I'd be circulating the room and ensuring that everybody is on task and actually writing an answer, or at least thinking about an answer.
Agreed. Yeah, and I think it can't be too short. It can't be, because if you have it too long, there'll be drift. Other people will drift off.
Exactly.
And it can't be too short, because you want them to actually develop it. So we've built in the thinking time. You're circulating, so you've already established that. So circulate to listen to pairs while they're talking. What do you think you could be doing as you're circulating?
Perhaps as I'm circulating, also reminding them how long they've got left, maybe, like keeping them on time, and perhaps prompting certain students who are maybe sat there looking a little bit blank or a little bit stuck, maybe. If somebody's written something down, could be prompting them to expand further, because one of the things in history that usually happens is we get usually quite surface level response from some pupils, and if it's a more complicated question which is evaluating and explaining, then clearly that needs to be enforced properly.
Definitely, so nudging and
exactly.
Slowly guiding and
praising and
definitely
and
something I didn't mention is when we're establishing the partners, you could think carefully about who's going to be with who. To maybe stretch some students. To push some students out their comfort zone.
So I suppose when you do establish the partners and it becomes a routine, as soon as we say, okay, we're going to do think, pair, share, either the seating plan would allow for the partners to be sat near each other or
Yeah,
in
I think so.
non-COVID.
Well, because I skipped over that part,
Yeah.
which I shouldn't have done. What do you think that step would look like when you're establishing the talk partners?
Ideally, I would consider that in the seating plan that I have for the particular class. So, putting together pupils who may work well together, who I know from experience might work well together, or even pupils with different abilities, seating them together, and then when I'm saying, okay, here's a question, think, pair, share, they automatically know to turn to the person next to them and discuss, hopefully. So making sure everybody has a partner and everybody knows who their partner is.
Exactly. It's about instilling the routine, isn't it?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So, and then the final part, so you've circulated, you've nudged or prompted, as you said, maybe helped some students that are struggling, push some other ones further along. Then the fifth and final step is using cold call to sample the pair's responses. So I noticed when I watched you doing your questioning, some students had hands up, but you didn't rely on that. So it's when we do, well, we can talk about cold calling another time, but you've got to establish whether you want hands up, hands down. So that's something to think about. And maybe when I come to see you, we can see how that works. That could be an area of focus.
Yeah.
But you've got to signal that it's the end of the discussion time. Pause, wait till you've got everyone.
Yeah.
Use your body language, use your eyes to make sure everyone's focused. And then go with the cold calling, ask the question. Michael, what were you and Jose discussing in your pair?
Yeah.
And what do you think you'd do once you'd had Michael's initial response?
So once the pupil has given me an initial response, if it is clearly lacking in depth or has errors in it, then clearly I would correct that, those errors, or maybe even get the partner to add. So then they're basically helping each other, and that process of peer sharing is, we can see how it's working.
Definitely, I totally agree. So hear the full response, get the partner involved. I would agree. Do you agree? Are you sure you agree? And get the discussion there. And then once you've got a full answer, not just part of it, check with the partner if the partner hasn't spoken, and then move on to another pair to see if they can add more or see if they disagree, for example. So let's quickly go through the 5 steps again. So you establish the talk partners for every student. We discussed what that would look like. You'd build it into your routine and your seating plan. You'd set the question. So what was the most damaging term of the Versailles Treaty, for example? You set a very clear time frame and a goal. So maybe a goal could be, I want 5 bullet points explaining this, or in it being history, there might be a certain structure you want. So that's something to think about. You build in the thinking time, so you get them to write it down on their own, first of all, with a clear time frame. Into pairs, you're actively circulating, you're nudging, you're prompting. Signal, pause, insist at the end, so they all know, they're all focused on you. We cold call, we make sure both partners contribute and give a full response before then moving on to other students to check if they've been listening or to agree, disagree, or build upon what they said. So, Alysha, the awkward bit, let's rehearse it. We can't do a full rehearsal, obviously, because I'm not a Year 11 GCSE class and I don't know much about the Versailles Treaty. So why don't you, in this instance, talk me through what you'll do at each stage with the question and the wording of how you would set it up?
Okay, right. So if we start here with the establishing talk partners for every student, hopefully I'll have done that at some point in one of the lessons, or the seating plan will be arranged as such, and they will know that is their partner for these types of questions. So then I would here, my questions would obviously be planned out. I would set the question. I would say, okay, so we are going to do think, pair, share now. Your question is, what was the most damaging term of the Treaty of Versailles? I will say to them as well, I want you to, first of all, think about the answer, and I will give you a minute to write down what you are thinking for an answer for this particular question. And so then I've set the question there, and I've given them a time frame. For the goal here, I will say I want to see at least 3 bullet points on your page. That's what you're aiming for. So you've got 1 minute, off you go on your own for a minute.
Excellent.
Write something down. Here, so building in thinking time, that's what we've kind of just done there,
Mm-hmm.
isn't it? Yeah, so I've given them the minute to think. Now I would also say, okay, so once that minute has lapsed, I'd be reminding them, obviously, in that time, how long they've got left and things, right? Okay, pens down, now turn to your partner and your think, pair, share partner, and talk about what you think was the most damaging term of the Treaty of Versailles. So that'll give them the the opportunity to discuss. As they are doing that, I will be circulating the room, listening, perhaps adding to conversation or prompting if there's maybe some quiet ones.
How would you prompt?
So, for example, if there's a pair sat there saying, okay, I think the economic terms were the most damaging, and the conversation kind of stops there, I say, okay, so give me specifics. What were the economic terms? How much was Germany forced to pay as a result of the treaty? So just prompting them with little questions like that, hopefully. So then as well, really, I should have there said you have got so long to talk about it, giving them the time in there as well.
Agreed.
Obviously, imagine I've said there, you've got another minute to now discuss. Okay, so right, your minute is now up. Please put your pens down, turn this way, and then I'd say, right, pause the question again, and then they know, hopefully with routine, that it's hands down and no hands up at this point in time for the cold calling aspect here. Then I would say, okay, Maria, what do you think was the most damaging term of the treaty? Maria will give me her answer. I might then say, okay, Anna, do you agree with what you discussed with Maria? Is there anything you would add to that? And perhaps then, once they have given me their response, go to another pair and build on the answer and the discussion and see if there's another point of view, because there probably will be with history and the subjectiveness of it.
Alysha, you've skipped one little thing,
okay,
which is the signal, pause and insist at the end of the time. How would you talk me through how would you signal to the students that the time was up?
Okay.
What's your usual method?
I usually do a countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Pens down. Look this way. Time up is what I would normally do.
Well, we can see how that works, and then make sure the pause is in there.
Yeah. And I mean, if there may be some instances where someone is still twiddling around with a pen or something, and I say, okay, right, please put your pen down, and usually that works.
Okay, excellent. Is there a particular area that you think, when I come to see you, going through these steps, is there a particular area you want me to look at?
Yeah, I think maybe this building in the thinking time, this 3 and 4, because I think with me, I do sometimes feel that awkwardness almost when you say, okay, you've got a minute to think and write. And I think what I need to maybe do is make more use of that silent time myself, and when I'm circulating, actually prompting them properly rather than trying to count down the time quickly, because sometimes it just feels very strange when everyone's completely silent, when the class is completely silent. So
Yes.
I think, just making sure with my timing that I'm actually giving them a minute to think and write, and
Brilliant.
then enough time to discuss as well.
Okay, so we've got quite a specific area of question we're looking at, but I think within that, there's something that we should look at more micro areas. So we'll do that. Is there anything else you wanted to talk through with Think Pair Share?
Look.
It doesn't have to be.
No, I think here is my point that I would like to work more on, perhaps next time you do come.
Brilliant. No, I'm looking forward to it. So what steps do you need to take in order to put this action step into place?
Okay. So I think what I need to identify is where the opportunities for Think Pair Share are going to fit in to my schemes of work and my lesson planning in general. So physically planning it into my lesson plans and knowing what questions, planning my questions in advance, basically, and then making it clear to the pupils, embedding it more in routine, I think, generally.
Definitely. So when would be a good time for me to come and see this?
I've got
in practice.
Year 11 Wednesday of next week afternoon after lunch.
Would that give you enough time?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Fine.
Okay, well I'll come and we'll, as you say, we'll focus on steps 3 and 4 in particular.
Yeah.
But obviously I'll be looking at the other steps to see how I can help and make further tweaks.
Okay. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Alysha.
Thank you very much.